Okay, today, this nice Erev Shabbat Chag, we are, with the time change and all, we are starting to learn Shekalim Daf Hey. Today's daf is sponsored by Mona and David Schwartz and family in honor of the 27th year side of their mother and Bubby Mary Horowitz, Aleh Shalom, Bat Aharon Halevi and Meryl, a woman whose home epitomized the mitzvah of Hachnasat Orchim, and by Sarah Borelowitz in honor of her new grandson, son of Eliza and Ashi Harrow, Mazal Tov. Okay, we're going to start at the bottom of Daled Amud Bet. Okay, so we were learning about this case of Achim and Shutafim. If you remember, we had these brothers, and the idea was that these brothers inherited money from their fathers, so they were together at the beginning, which means that if they're one owner, they're chayav in the tithing of the animals. However, they're going to be patur from this extra expense of the kalbon, because if their father is giving it as a gift for them, and anyone who gives a gift for someone else, you're exempt from the kalbon, the extra payment to this machatzira shekel payment. So we basically said, but if they split up, they get their inheritance, and then they decide to go into partnership together, they bring their money back together, even though it was all the same money, it now has a different status. And when it comes to the tithing of the animals, they're now considered partners, and partners aren't obligated because it says, Asher yelecha, it will be for you, you singular, not partners. But when it comes to the kalbon, they're going to be obligated in the kalbon because now no one's giving for them. It's as if it's their own money. It's as if two people bring the machatzira shekel together. In that case, they have to pay the kalbon. So now we're going to talk about another aspect of this. Rabbi Chia Amar, Rabbi Yirmiyah Bai, he said that Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the following question. The lama leitnan amrin, why don't we say, while it was already saying every time you're exempt from this one, you're obligated this one, and the reverse, why don't you say, pamim shem chayavim bezeh bezeh, or pamim shem pturim mizeh mizeh. I can find a case where you're going to be obligated in both or exempt in both. And why didn't they bring that case? Why didn't they say that? Hey Chavida, how could that be? Skip the parentheses. There's a few parentheses today we're going to skip. Chalku hanechasim velo chalku abema chayavim bezeh bezeh. Let's say you didn't split all the inheritance. Let's say you split up all the cash, all the money, but you didn't split up the animals. So in that case, you'll be obligated in the animals because it's still part of the father's reshut. So you'll be obligated maaser behema. When it comes to money, you already split the money and you're paying the machatzira shekel from the money. So when it comes to the money, it's not as if the estate of the father is paying for it, in which case you'll be obligated. So you should have said that case. And now let's talk about the exempt case, the reverse. You split the animals, but you didn't split the money. Then so then the father's paying basically for your machatzira shekel. And when it comes to the animals, you're partners, which again, you'll be exempt. So why don't you say those two cases? There's no real answer, okay? But he basically says the Mishnah could have listed those cases if already they were saying all the time it's either exempt in one, obligated in the other, right? Why didn't it mention these two unique cases where you would actually be exempt from both or obligated for both? Amar Rabbi Mana, what you just said, by the way, is bishalo haitanya, which case? The first case. If you separate the money, the cash and anything like cash, but not the animals, then you'll be ptulim mizeh mizeh. Well, he's going to say, I'm going to limit this case. Bishalo haita be'ema rov. It's only if most of the possessions of the father were not the animals. But if the majority of the father's possessions were the animals, and you didn't split the animals, and you paid the machatzira shekel, we're going to exempt you from the kalbon, because since the majority of what was of the father's estate was not divided, you're still considered part of the father's estate, the money, even though you divided up the money. Still, we're going to consider you for the machatzira shekel. It's as if it was paid out by the father's estate. So we're going to say, in that case, you'll actually be exempt from the kalbon. And again, you'll be obligated to maaser behema. So that's an exception to what we just said. Rabbi Avin Amar Rabbi Shammai. Rabbi Avin says that Rabbi Shammai Bai. Rabbi Shammai asked the following question. Mipnei she'asitim ka'adam echad etz maaser behema, at potrom min kalbon. He says, I don't understand though. If you're going to be like one person from maaser behema, then you should be exempt from the kalbon. Okay. In other words, in this case, okay, he's now talking about, one second, according to this, he's discussing the case. Let me just refresh my memory about this. Right, he's asking, if they didn't split up the Yerusha at all. Okay, we're back to the Mishnah. And the Mishnah says if you didn't split up the inheritance, then you're obligated in Maser Behema, but exempt from the Kalbon. So now they want to know, why are you exempt from the Kalbon? Because basically what the question is like this. When you don't split up the property, we're going to view you when it comes to Maser Behema as if any animals you give are from the estate of the father, right? We're going to be stringent. So now he's saying, why don't we just say that we're stringent and say that maybe when you each give your machatzira shekel, maybe it's not coming from the estate of the father. And maybe we should view you as if you're two separate people giving it and you're giving for yourself. His basic question is, we're being stringent when it comes to maser. And it's not often that we say you're exempt from one thing and obligated in the other. So even though we explained the logic as to why that would be, what he's questioning is really, why don't we just say we're stringent all the way? And why don't we just view it as if you're giving your own machatzira shekel, in which case we'll obligate you the kalbon. And even though when it comes to the possessions, we're viewing our possessions as one, and you're not considered partners, and you're not going to be exempt from maser behema, but that's just because we're going to be stringent. Because really, you could look at it in two different ways. You could look at it as if they're partners. You could look at it as if they're one. So they're basically saying, why don't you just go l'chumra in both directions? That's what his question is. So now the answer is, Amar le lo shanya. Lo shanyahi, shehu noten sela echad shlema. When it comes to the machatzira shekel, what happens in this case? We're going to take from the estate of the father one whole shekel that's going to cover both of you. Well, if that's the case, since we're taking one whole shekel that's covering both of you, what does that look like? It looks like you're giving it together, and it looks like it's coming from the estate of the father, and that's why there's no reason to be stringent here. Because usually we're stringent because something looks like, it doesn't look right. Here, it looks totally fine. You're bringing one shekel for two people. That's quite obvious then that it's all coming from the same pocket, which basically means then we're going to exempt you. And therefore, there's no reason to be stringent. To which the Gemara questions, well, me'ata, if that's the case, then afilu chalku v'chazru v'nishtatfu uptulim in a kalbon, right? Uptulim in a kalbon. If that's the case, then you should basically say these brothers should always be exempt if they're going to bring together. Even if, what did we say in the Mishnah? That if they were partners, if they inherited, then they split the inheritance, and then they got back together and decided to put all their money, pool it together. What did we say in that case? They're treated as partners. It's not anymore like the father's inheritance, in which case they're going to be obligated in the kalbon. But if you're saying, now, how do they pay in that case? They're again, because they're partners, they're going to take one whole shekel and say that's covering both of us. So if that's the whole idea, that once they do one shekel, it's covering both of them, it looks like they're just, it's the father's estate paying for them. So why in the case when they split in the middle and then came back together, wouldn't we say also, still looks like the estate is paying for them because it's one shekel? So they say that's a silly question, because, which is probably what you're thinking, right? Oh, and by the way, I didn't read the continuation, which is utanina. And it says in our Mishnah, in that case, chayavim b'kalbon. Right? They're treated as if they're two separate individuals and they're each going to be obligated to kalbon. So Rabbi Ba, B'Shem Abba, Bar Rav Huna, says the following, which is probably what you were thinking, which is basically, I don't know if you would have worded it this way, but the fact that these two brothers got back together, the fact that they were originally had inherited the same money, split it up, and now we're together again, what happened originally is no longer relevant. It's no different. If they would, it's not just the fact that they're giving one shekel together. If you and me gave one shekel together and you inherited money, right? What they're giving is the example of brothers-in-law. It's like two brothers-in-law who each inherited, right? They're giving the case of brothers-in-law because I guess it was very common in those days, family businesses, as they are today somewhat, right? But in those days, all the more so, family businesses were much more common. And they're basically saying it's no different than two brothers-in-law going into business together, where you don't say, right, each one got it from a different place, and now they're together. You wouldn't say you're patur from kalbon, because if it's coming from the estate, there is no estate, right? They came from two different places, their money. So therefore, when these brothers, even though it originally came from the estate of the father, they're no longer part of the estate of the father because they already split that up. The estate is disbanded. There is no such thing anymore. So therefore, the fact that they're giving one shekel together isn't proof that if the father's estate is paying for it, only when there's still a father's estate. Once they've split up the father's estate, it's no longer there, and that's not a significant thing anymore. So one act could be viewed in a different light depending on what the background to that act is. So when they haven't yet split up the estate, that 1 shekel is clearly proving they're clearly as one, and it's coming from the father on their behalf, and therefore they're exempt, because remember, then it's like a gift, okay? But when they're already beyond that and they've already split up the estate, then you can't say that. I assume you were wondering this, which is, okay, so we gather up the half shekels, and then we gather up these kalbonot, right? Do they all go into one pot? Does it all go to cover the sacrifices? So that sort of depends on how you view it. Remember, we saw yesterday, there was a debate. Why do we have this kalbon? Is it because of what Rabbi Meir calls hechreya, which is God said, this is the machatzira shekel zeh, in which case it has to be exactly like that. And we're not sure that ours are exactly, so we add a little bit more. Well then, and that's what we're going to see here, Rabbi Meir Omer, the shkalim, it just goes together with the shkalim and goes for the sacrifices. But not everybody agrees that that's what it's there for, because we also said it's because it's like a commission fee for the money changers. So Rabbi Lazar Omer linidava, he says you keep them separate. Okay, so now the money lender, it's actually funny, he's getting paid a commission, but now he has to work harder. He says keep all the kabonot separate and all the shkalim separate. So now he says those go linidava. What is nidava? Nidava is a catchphrase. It's always going to mean, we're going to see it a lot in this Masechet. It means it goes to these kupot in the temple. We're going to talk about these shofarot. Okay, we'll get to it in a minute, so I may as well tell you right now, which is why are they called shofarot? So a shofar is narrow on one end and wider on the other. So these were basically narrow at the top, wide at the bottom. Why is that? So the people couldn't put their hands in and take the money out of there, right? It's very hard to get to the money at the bottom if there's a small opening at the top, right? It's like a stucco box. Now, stucco boxes aren't usually shaped that way, but these were shaped in that way so that all the money would go to the bottom and people wouldn't be able to steal it. So they had these shofarot in the temple, and some of them, actually 6 of them, were for nidava. What is the nidava? It's that when there weren't, we've talked about this before, when there weren't sacrifices going on the altar, right? They always wanted the altar to be working during the day, so they would put up burnt offerings that basically get burnt entirely, the korbanot olah. They would put those up, what's called ketz hamizbeach. Okay, so they would go. So all the money that went into nidava, all these korbanot would go toward that. Rabbi Shimon Shizuli Omer. Okay, that's basically when you don't know what to do with something, it's sanctified, but you can't use it for, like you can't use it for the machatzira shekel according to this opinion, because it's not for the korbanot zibor. That's the machatzira shekel. This is something additional, so let's just put it to nidava. We're going to see a lot of opinions, and by the way, this is a quote from the Tosefta. Rabbi Shimon Shizuli Omer, Liku'ei zahav etzipoy lebeit kodesh hakodashim. They would cover, we saw this yesterday, they would cover the floors and the walls of Kodesh Kodashim with these gold plates. So go to cover the gold plates in that room, which is again something sanctified because it's in the Kodesh Kodashim, but it's not exactly sacrifices. Ben Azai Omer, Shulchanim hayu notnin otam b'scharam. This is what you might have thought, right? Because if it's a commission, where's it going to? To pay the Shulchanim for their work, the money changers. The Yeshomrim lahotzaat rachim, travel expenses, right? The Shulchanim had to travel around. So they get paid, right? Reimbursed for their gas and whatever else, right? For their donkeys or whatever it might be, their travel expenses. So it's interesting about these different opinions. There's a lot of different opinions here about what they did with the money, which is interesting, right? Really, what did they do with it? Some people explain that these are all true. They divided it. Some went to pay the Shulchanim, which by the way, they explain, it's not like the Shulchanim pocketed it. He would bring it all to the temple. The kolbonot would be separate. They would then divide it up. They take salary for the money changers. They would get a certain salary, and that way also it became equal. Otherwise, if each one collects his own kolbonim, right, it almost sounds like a salesman gets a commission, right? Then he would get it all, right? If you sell more, you get more. You sell less, you get less. That's not the way we want things to work here. This is the temple, and this isn't like a for-profit type place. So we're going to bring it all to the temple, and then they're going to get some salary. They're going to, right? And then they're going to divide it between these different things. So that's another way to understand it. Finish the first parak. Now moving on to the next. Halakha Aleph. Mitzarfim shkalim ledarkonot mipnei masoy haderech. Well, now if the people who collect all this money have to carry every single machatzira shekel, it's going to be very heavy. So what can they do? They're allowed to change the machatzira shekel into a bigger coin, a darkon, which we're going to see later also in a few days. I think it might be ready tomorrow or the day after. But anyway, the darkonim were a bigger valued coin. You would transfer into bigger coins and then take fewer coins to the temple. because of the masoya derech, because it's too heavy to carry. This is very, some of this Masechet is just very practical things. How do we make sure the system works, right? Like I'll give you an example. If the shul is collecting money for membership, so you can have everybody send a check in, but if you can come up with a way to do it by bid, Zeli, whatever you might have, right? Or you can do a bank transfer, it's going to make it much more likely that people will actually take care of it, other than having to write a check, drop it off at someone's house, right? That's already more of a pain in the neck. So what did they do? The same way they had these shofarot in the temple to put the money, they also had shofarot in the Medina. What is the Medina? So usually it means outside the temple, anywhere outside the temple, but the Rambam says that it means outside Jerusalem. Okay, Rashi says this includes Jerusalem. Okay, not Rashi here, but Rashi in other places. The Medina means Jerusalem, and it, right? But the Rambam says no, it means outside Jerusalem. If you lived in Jerusalem, you'd have to go to the, either send it with someone or go yourself to the kuppah in the temple. But according to others, no, even in Jerusalem, they put up, right? They wanted to make it as easy as possible. So they put up all sorts of places where people could put their money. Then the money, right? If you had exact change, you would put it there. If not, you go to this money changer and then he would put it there. So basically, that's how you would do it. Now we get into what we call a Bava Metzia issue, which is, okay, this is going to come up. We're going to see this a lot in Bava Metzia, which is, it's another Masechet, which is what's the responsibility? Who's responsible if something happens to the money on the way? Okay, right? It's very likely someone could get robbed on the way. They're bringing it. I send it with the messenger, right? The shulchani. He, right? Either it's the shulchani or someone else who brings the money. I send it with the messenger. He brings the money to the temple. Who's responsible if it gets stolen from him? So now it's going to depend. So so our whole city gets together. We collect our money. We send it with someone to bring it to the temple. And it was stolen or got lost from him. Now, it all depends on what was happening in the temple at the time or before. If already it was a Chab Nisan and our money's on its way, but a Chab Nisan comes, and a Chab Nisan, which means, again, they would take all the money that was gathered and they'd say, okay, they would put 3 boxes with 3 se'im in each box. They would fill it up and they'd say, we're using this money to go buy the sacrifices. That's Trumat HaLishka. Now, according to most opinions, that includes everyone who already gave, even if it didn't yet come here. They're basically saying this money is representative of all the people who gave already. And some people say, even if you haven't given, we're including you in this. Okay. So if it happened that it was stolen after a Chab Nisan, then it's as if my money was already given to the temple because they did the Trumat HaLishka, which means the money is now already sanctified, even though it's not yet there, which means that it's as if I gave my machatzit shekel already. So I'm not responsible anymore. So if we all gave it to one of you and you brought it to the temple and it got lost or stolen, whose responsibility is it? The temple loses out, basically. So if that's the case, though, still the shaliach, now this is what comes up above a Metzia, if you're watching someone's item and it gets stolen, and you're watching it for free, then what we're going to say is you have to swear that it was stolen or lost, and then you're not responsible. You release yourself of responsibility. So im nitchema truma nishba'in, the shaliach has to swear to someone, because otherwise, what's the worry? The worry is the shaliach will claim that it got lost or stolen, and he'll say, okay, so, but he really pocketed the money. So we don't trust, right? We don't trust people in general. We worry that maybe they'll do that. So we make you swear. You have to swear, right? Like, let's say I give you my computer to watch, and then you claim it was stolen. How do I know it was stolen, right? So you have to swear to me that it was stolen, and then you're not responsible. That's if you're a shomer china. So if already nitrama truma, so nishbe'in legizbarim, they have to swear to the temple because the temple's lost right now. But im lav, if you haven't done trumat halishka, then if it gets lost or stolen on the way, all the people of the city are going to have to do it again. They're going to have to put new money. So therefore, if we're going to have to pay again, we want to know for sure that you didn't steal our money. So therefore, and they have to bring a new shekel instead. What if that happens? The shaliach, you're taking the money for all of the city. You swear it got lost or stolen. And then guess what? We find the money. After we already gave a new machatzit shekel. So now we've all given double. So what happens to that money? Either it was found or the robbers were found and they returned the money. Elu ve'elu shkalim. everything is sanctified. We don't get our money back because everything already became sanctified. You can't get it back. You can't say, oh, it'll go to my next year's machatzita shekel. It doesn't work that way because we talked about this before, that the machatzita shekel went by the year. This year's money goes to buy this year's sacrifice. If there's leftover money, you can't buy this year's sacrifices. You have to use it you have to get new money for next year's sacrifices. So therefore, this was all this year's money and tough luck. So you're basically given double. The hekdesh, right? The temple wins out basically. Now the Gemara suggests, why don't we turn it into a pearl? First of all, pearls are lighter, right? And they're worth a lot of money. Why don't we just do that? But the price is fluctuates. Right? This is all you can see. It's very interesting because we're getting into basic, right, everyday things. So the price, there could be a fluctuation of price, and then the temple will, right? Let's say right now it's worth 100 shekels, and then you get to the temple, it's only worth 90. So the hekdesh is going to lose. You don't want to take something whose price fluctuates. As it says in another Mishnah, we're talking about hekdesh in general. If you sanctify something, you can redeem it. Let's say I'm sanctifying my couch. I'm not going to bring my couch to the temple. So what do? I take either the value of my couch, or I can even take shvei kesef. I can take a different item that's valued at the same amount as the couches, and I can bring that. But except for chutz mishkalim, shkalim have to be in money, not in value. So you can't use anything else. There's different debate about how to read this next line. I'm going to read it by the Meiri's interpretation because to me that seemed the most, like the best interpretation. That sounded more like the pshat. I had some issues with the way others explain it, so I'm going to go with this approach. But if you have this as a question, don't worry, I'm explaining it differently than what might appear by you. Some people view this as a question. The Meiri views this as a comment. Ve'ein podim b'kelim, which is referring actually, according to the Meiri, to other hekdesh things. So even though you can do it in shvei kesef, things that are valued at something, you can't do it to kelim. And what he means, according to the Meiri, is you can't redeem it onto fancy vessels that are worth a lot of money. Okay, why? So Amar Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Shema Yazilu HaKelim v'Nimtzai Hekdesh Mafsi, because these things are very expensive items. They also, their price fluctuates often, and therefore we don't want there to be a problem. And therefore, uf hachinami, uf means af. Okay, it's a different version of the word af. Even here, Shema Tazila Margalif and Nimtzai Hekdesh Mafsi. And then they're just using this as a comparison. Just like there, even though you can use something valued at money, but not something that fluctuates a lot in price, and therefore it's going to be the same here with the margali. It's the same logic. We can't turn it into a pearl because the pearl might change in value. Manita b'tachlin chadatin. Okay, now we're back to this issue that they would put up shofarot outside of the temple. Now, in the temple, we're going to learn later that they had one shofar called Shekalim Chadashim and one called Shekalim Yeshanim. So if you didn't bring last year's and you wanted to bring this year's, it would go into the kuppah that was called Shekalim Yeshanim, old ones. So now, right, and here, by the way, thank you for pointing this out, Gita, that Taklin Chadatin, this is where the commentator got his name from, right? This is why he called his commentary the Taklin Chadatin. It comes from here because the whole Masechet is all about the Shekalim Chadashim. Yes, we're also talking about last year's, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is the Taklin Chadatin, the new ones, which, by the way, reminds me that I keep forgetting to announce this, which is Gita wrote a fabulous intro to Shekalim, which is on the site. So I recommend that you look at it. You can maybe print it up before Chag if you have time, and then you can read. It's a very long intro about all sorts of things about the Masechet. Okay, which means even though in the temple there was one thing called Shekalim Chadashim, one called Shekalim Yeshanim. By the way, Chadatin and right, it's the taf switches with shin. So Taklin, Shekalim, Chadatin is Chadashim. It's very easy to understand what that word means, even though it looks like what does that word have to do with anything? But it's just switch the taf and the shin, and then you get a normal Hebrew word. So the ones that they put outside the temple, they only put for this year's. If you didn't do last year's, you got to figure out a way to get it to the temple. You can't just put it in one of these pushkas that are near your house. Betane Ken, and it says so in a Braita also, Atikim b'mikdash ve'en atikim b'medina. The old one is only in the temple and not outside. Now we're going to talk about, and I specifically kind of mentioned this, but didn't really say it straight on, which is Matnita b'shomer chinam. Our Mishnah, when it talks about the responsibility, it was only talking about someone who didn't get paid for their work. Aval b'shomer sachar lo bada. But if you hired someone to be a shomer sachar, then, right, to bring your money and you paid them, like the whole city, let's say we collected money, we said, we're paying you to deliver our stuff to the temple. Once he's a shomer sachar is responsible for gneva and avidah. That's why they get paid. They get paid in order to say, I'm assuming responsibility. So if that's the case, then aval b'shomer sachar lo b'dad. This isn't true by a shomer sachar. He wouldn't swear and get exempted. No, he'd have to pay. Rav Abba says, no. Afilu tema b'shomer sachar. You could still explain our Mishnah by shomer sachar. How so? Well, shomer sachar is responsible for onus. Onus is something beyond his control, right? There's gneva v'aveda, which basically we assume, right? Put your alarm on, lock your doors, make sure, right? Take all the precautions necessary. Losing it, we all know you're partially responsible when you lose things, right? But if something happens that was beyond your control, like what? Like nignevu, you could explain the Mishnah as being a shomer sachar, and the case was nignevu b'listim mezuyan. Somebody put a gun to their head, or a knife, and say, "Give me the money right now." You really have no choice. It's not your fault at all. And then he wouldn't be responsible. He'd be able to swear. Or avdu kamisha tavasvina tobayam. Let's say he was taking it on a boat and the boat sunk. Right, that wasn't his fault, unless of course it was a bad boat and it had a hole in the bottom and he just didn't pay attention. Right, that's something else. Amar Rabbi Yusti b'Rabbi Sima. Ati kamanda amar tormim ala gavoy va'al ha'atid ligavot. This, by the way, is all according to, and I already mentioned this before, those who say that when they were torem the lishka, they included all those who had already given, but their money hadn't yet arrived. And even those who hadn't yet given, but were planning to give, it includes all of those. But Biram Kimanda Amar ain't tormim lo ala gavoy va'al ha'atid ligavot lo b'da. But our Mishnah doesn't follow those because our Mishnah said it all depended. Were they torem lishka? Were they not? If you think that Tchumat HaLishka was only on the money that was in the temple at the time and this money wasn't, well, then he's always going to have to swear to the owners, right, to the original people and not to the Beit HaMikdash, because the owners are always going to be responsible until it actually gets to the temple. So now we're talking about the people send their shkalim, right? They say they have to, we're on the line, and then it was Nignevu Avdu. Okay, we're going to talk about this. Amar Rabbi Elazar, to Rabbi Shimon This, by the way, okay, now we're going to focus on the aspect that they swear to the Gizbarim. If already they did Trumat Lishka, and since we said, according to those who say, the Tormim Talishka and Aleph Ben Nisan covers even money that hasn't arrived yet, then already the responsibility shifts to, what it basically means is, as soon as you give that money already belongs to the temple, basically, right? Or you gave the money, it doesn't yet belong to the temple, but on Aleph Nisan, when they Tormim Talishka, that money is now sanctified money, and it belongs to the temple, which means if it gets lost, it's the temple's loss. So now Rabbi Elazar says, by the way, this is only Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Why? Because what does it say there? What does the messenger have to do? He has to swear to the Gizbarim. Now, there's a concept, which you might not know, which is the whole reason you swear. I explained it before, because we're worried that if you're watching someone's stuff, maybe you're going to be lax about it, right? And you maybe steal it yourself. Say, I'm keeping it and I'll just claim it's stolen. So it comes from the pasuk, ki yitain ish al re'ehu. If you give your friend something to watch, now the temple is not your friend. The temple is sanctified. So they claim that this whole law of swearing, there's a law that says it's not applicable for Hekdesh. So if that's the case, it's not applicable for Hekdesh, then we have a problem. How do they swear to the temple? There is no such thing as swearing to the temple. So we're going to have two explanations for this. First is Rabbi Elazar, who says this is all Rabbi Shimon. Why? Because Rabbi Shimon says, "Kodashim shu chayav ba'achriyutan k'nischasavim." If you are still responsible for it, it's not yet considered temple property. As long as you're still responsible. Like, for example, if I say, I'm going to bring Hare Alai, this is always the difference between neder and a nedava. Either you say, this animal will be first sacrifice, or I'm going to bring upon I promise to bring an animal. If I say I commit to bring an animal, if I bring an animal and the animal gets lost, I have to bring a new one. If I say this animal alai, then that's a different type. If the animal gets lost, I'm not responsible to bring another one. So what does this mean? If I say I'm going to bring it, then I'm responsible to bring a new one. That means that as long as I haven't brought it to the temple, it's still considered my property, even though I've sanctified it. It's hekdesh, but it's not really fully hekdesh. That's what we're going to say, these shkalim are. Okay, and that's according to Rabbi Shimon, who says, if you're chayav ba'achrayut, they're considered yours still. So therefore, since the shaliach is responsible for them, until it gets to the temple, it's still his responsibility. Therefore, it's not, even though theoretically they were tormim talishka already and it's sanctified, it's not exactly sanctified. That's why he has to swear. Comes from Rabbi Yochanan, explains it differently. No, our Mishnah isn't just Rabbi Shimon. okay? Because others think not like Rabbi Shimon, that it's not, it's a hekdesh. And then you wouldn't be swearing. So now why are you swearing according to Rabbi Yochanan? Mishum shvuat takana, it's not actually that you really have to swear in terms of the law. Letter of the law, Torah law, you don't have to swear because it's hekdesh and you don't swear for hekdesh. However, what's the problem? If we don't make you swear, people might take advantage. So because we don't want people to take advantage and, or maybe just not be very careful about this because they'll say, well, it's not my responsibility and I don't have to swear if something happens to it. So I don't really care. In order to prevent that, the rabbis instituted a shvuat takana. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's only midrabanan, this swearing. Well, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's only shvuah derabanan. We understand why they swear in the case where they haven't yet been torei metalishka. In the case where they already were torei metalishka, we swear to the gizbarim. That makes sense because what's the problem? The problem is, according to the first opinion, even though it's he's swearing to the hekdesh. We just said you're not allowed to swear to hekdesh. So if you're saying it's just an extra derabanan rabbinic law that let's make him swear so that he's not, lax in his job, we understand. Mishum shvuat takana. That's why he swears to the hekdesh. But Ela Rabbi Elazar, which is Elazar, nishbe'in lebnei ha'ir hadihi de Rabbi Shimon. We understand why they swear to the people because it's still considered their property until Trumat HaLishka happens. But nishba'in legizbarim ma'avi datayu. Okay, and this question means, well, because you can't swear to the hekdesh, you don't swear to hekdesh. The gizbarim are the treasurers of the temple. There is no such thing that you swear on a d'oraita level. And as yes, maybe the rabbis institute something. That's Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. According to Rabbi Elazar, there's a shvuah d'oraita, Torah law. Where could there be a Torah law that you're swearing to the temple? So they have to understand the shvuah a little bit differently. So they're going to explain two different answers. One is they don't really swear to the temple. Nishbe'in lebnei ha'ir b'ma'amad gizbarim. They swear to the people of the town in the presence of the gizbarim. Okay, and some people say what they're swearing about is to get their money. They're saying we did our job properly in order to get our money, but they have to do it with the gizbarim around to make it a more serious shvuah. They need some representatives of the temple there, but not that they're actually swearing to the temple people. So the people don't suspect them. Inami nishvaluhu poshin. Or again, we're going to assume maybe this really isn't a d'oraita shvuah according to this. And they're just swearing to the temple people. And they don't really have to swear to the temple people, but they don't want people to suspect them. So they swear to the temple people, even though really there is no such swear according to the Torah law. They just don't want to look bad. So they swear so that they could clear their name, even though there's no real law to do that. Okay, now we're back to, this was all within Rabbi Elazar. Now we're back to Rabbi Yochanan. Again, what did Rabbi Yochanan say? Everyone agrees this is just a shvuah takana. So now, even though the bnei ha'ir have to pay, the question is, why does he have to swear? So that's because we can't have hekdesh without swearing. In other words, we want to ensure that people treat hekdesh properly, and therefore we institute that you have to swear in order to, the guard, the shomer, the messenger, really. The messenger isn't exempt from his responsibility unless he takes a shvuah. So that's the purpose of the shvuah, according to him. This is what the takana was all about. What if I designate a shekel and then it gets lost? Okay, so whose responsibility is it? Now, is it as if I could say, listen, I gave my shekel. The fact they didn't make it to the temple is irrelevant. I gave it. Or you could say, what are you talking about, right? No such thing. Until it gets to the temple, you're responsible. So that's another question. Before we were talking about when you send it with a messenger. Here it's just saying, let's say I designate my shekel. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar, chayav b'achor yuto ad shim serena legizbar. It's your responsibility to make sure it gets to the gizbar, okay, to the treasurer. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omer, hekdesh b'reshut gavah b'kol makom shehu. Once I designate this as my machatzira shekel, it has hekdesh status. Once it has hekdesh status, it's no longer mine. I've done my thing. I'm not responsible anymore. Okay, so if it gets lost, it's a problem. Now, obviously, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish isn't going to match our Mishnah because we already said It depends, tromima lishka, not tromima lishka. I was thinking the other day, my daughter wanted some eggs. She's vegan and she doesn't eat eggs during the year, but Pesach, what else is she going to eat? So we don't eat kidney out. So we went on a search for real free range eggs and not just ones that look free range. But so we found some woman who sells them nearby. And the woman said, I'm going to leave them outside for you and just leave me the money. Okay. So this is the whole question here, right? If I say hifrish shiklo ve'avad, I'm not responsible. Well, then there's a range between what I did with that money. Did I just set it aside and put it in the middle of the street? Like she just put her eggs in the middle of the street. Now nobody stole them, but she kind of said, I'm putting them out for you. You put the money there, leave it, and I'll come get it. Now, what if that money was stolen, right? Now, because she told us to do it, we did what was the responsible thing. But if she hadn't told us, and let's say we just did that and left her money outside, and then she said, I don't know what happened to the money, or why'd you leave it outside? That's not responsible, right? So if we exempt whoever gave the shekel, in every case, it would be weird. Like people could just say, oh, what do you mean? I gave my shekel. Well, okay, I stuck in the middle of the street and someone stole it, but not my fault, right? It's a little bit weird. So, Rabbi Yochanan looks at it clearly, well, you have to get it there. That's what's most important. Rish Lakish is very interesting because what he's saying is, well, look, technically speaking, once you designate it, it's hekdesh. Once it's hekdesh, it's not yours and you're not responsible anymore. So now the Gemara is going to obviously ask, Manita Pliga, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, right? The Mishnah is difficult according to him. So, Nishba'in lebnei ha'ir, ubnei ha'ir shoklim tachtehem, right? So they say, what does it say? They have to swear to the bnei ha'ir, and the bnei ha'ir have to bring a new shekel, right? So the fact that he has to swear to them shows that he's responsible. And, it hasn't yet gotten to the gizbar, so obviously he's responsible. So what do they say? Lo od hi mishum shvuat takana. So they explain, they say, well, it's just a shvuat takana. It's even that case. Remember, before we said the gizbar was just a shvuat takana, when he swears to the temple. Now we're saying even his swearing to the people is really just a shvuami de Rabbanan, according to Rish Lakish. He doesn't really have to, because theoretically it's all hekdesh now, and it's not really their responsibility. Tani. Now, what if we talked in the Mishnah that if you find the stolen ones, then everything goes to the temple. But now we're going to learn about this. Harishonim noflim l'taklin chadatin. Hashniim noflim l'taklin atikin. The first ones go into the new year, this year's, and the second ones go into last year's. So now, what's the problem? Which are the first and which are the second? So eluhen rishonim ve'eluhen hashniim, which is which? So we're going to have two opposite opinions. Rabbi Pinchas beRabbi Chia, Rabbi Abba Meri, they have a machloket between them. Chad amar elu sheshalchu b'nei ha'ir tchila. What does it mean? The first ones, the ones that the people originally sent. Those are the ones that are sanctified that go to this year's. The second ones, the replacement ones that then became the main ones at some point, but they were the replacement ones. Those go in last year's. But Chahana Amar, the other one says, elu shekiu lidei gizbarim tchila. The first ones are the ones that ended up getting there first. The second one, the replacement ones, because the ones that were found later. So the first ones means the one that get there first, not the ones that were given first. So there's a debate about how to read this. New halacha, halacha bet, new Mishnah. Hanoten sheklo l'chavero lishkol al yado ushkalo al yadei atzmo. Here you have, we call in Hebrew rashlanut, right? Or misuse. I give my shekel to you to bring to the temple for me. And you decide when you bring it, you're bringing it for yourself. You take my money and you say, this is my machatzira shekel. Im nitrema, okay, so now, im nitrema truma, the question is, at what point, thank you, Tova, for negligence, although the truth is I'm not sure that rashlanu is the right word, even negligence, because it's really, I should say it better, it's taking advantage, right? I'm collecting money and now I claim it's for myself. So now he says, the Mishnah says, at what point are you considered, if you take the money and you now use it for yourself, at what point is it considered mi'ilah? Mi'ilah is misuse of consecrated property. You took my money that was sanctified and you used it. But the question is, at what point does it become sanctified? Remember, it becomes sanctified when they do the truma l'lishka. So now they're going to say like this: Im nitrema truma ma'al. If when I took it, it was after the 1st of Nisan, and we assume, like in the previous Mishnah, that we go by the opinion that when they did the truma l'lishka, all the money that was on its way, and even the money that hadn't yet been collected, is now sanctified and kind of was included in that. Then as soon as nitrema l'lishka, when it happens, then it's you're going to be ma'al. Okay, that's when mi'ilah happens, when nitrema truma. Okay, or if it was after nitrema truma, if it was after that, then already it was sanctified when you collected it, which means that as soon as you say I'm using this for myself, you did mi'ilah. Hashokel sheklo min hahekdesh. Second case. You take your shekel from the hekdesh, okay, from, again, someone else's money, let's say. Then, nitrema truma. Now you did it, okay, this was, let's say you collected on the 15th of Nisan, or that was a holiday, let's say you collected on the 10th. If you collected on the 10th, that was the first case. It's me'ilah immediately because you're using consecrated property. But if I took it from you first, then, so I took it on the 15th of Adar, then it became, the Trumat Lishka happened. At the Trumat Lishka, it's not sanctified. Then that's not me'ilah because I didn't use it now, I used it before. So the question is, when does me'ilah happen? This problem that I misused your property. When they take that money and they buy an animal with it, and then they use that animal, that's when. And some action has to happen for me to say, now I use, right? That is representative. It's as if a percentage of my money is in that animal. Something happened. It was used for something. That's called me'ilah because now I use my, right? I use your property for my shekel. This is a different case. If I took money that was already sanctified, it was the second tithe that we bring, that we're supposed to bring to the temple. So it was money that I redeemed the coins on, and then I took that money and I used it for my machzira shekel by accident. Or midmei shvi, which is in certain cases I can actually sell something that was shemitah produce. If I did that, the money has sanctity to it. And let's say I use that for my machzira shekel, yochal kenegdan. I have to basically put money instead of that money. Okay, we'll get to that in the Gemara, exactly how this works. So back to the beginning. Hashokel. Anantaninan im kirva bema. Or said, when do we do me'ilah in the middle case? When the animal is sacrificed. V'tanid be Rebbe im nitruma truma. Rebbe says, no. He has a different version of our Mishnah. His version says, when they do the truma l'ishkan, the chab b'nisan, that act in and of itself is already the misuse of consecrated property. Okay, skipping the parentheses again. Mantana im nitruma truma. So if you read it like that, who does that go by? Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon miyad hayam makabel ma'ota v'kohanim zrizim him. We saw this before. I think it was in Psachim that we saw it, which is not so long ago. Which is we assume as soon as the money gets, they use the money, we assume the kohanim zrizim they're going to already sacrifice sacrifices. So as soon as they pay the money for the animals, it's as if they already sacrificed the animals, and as if it was already used. Your money was used, and that's why your me'ilah ticks in right then. The kasha. But wait, this doesn't make any sense, this whole idea. Why? Let's say I steal your animal that you designate for a burnt offering, and I bring it to the temple, and I sacrifice it. Who sacrifices it? Is it yours or is it mine? It's yours. I just brought your ola to the temple. Yeah, I kind of said it was mine, but it's really your burnt offering. So they say, if I were to steal ola tosha chavero ushchato stam, and I just slaughtered it stam, I didn't say I'm using this for myself. I just bring it to the temple to slaughter it there. If I do that, and I don't say anything like I'm using this for myself, even if I intend to use it for myself, doesn't it work for you, not for me? So here, I brought my shekel. No one knows, right? It's in my mind. I said I'm using this for myself, but what's the relevance, right? Why wouldn't it just be that I gave it for you? So Amar Rabbi Yudin ti pater b'misuyam mishal beit Rabban Gamliel ne'amet kaben v'dochapol l'tochel kupa. It must be talking about where the money was very identifiable. It was some sort of special coin, like Rabban Gamliel had this special coin. He would put it in the kupa. Everybody would see, oh, here's Rabban Gamliel with the special money putting it in the coin. Okay, so now, and that means already that when I put it in and people think then it's clear. And the idea here is if I put it in randomly, no one's going to know that it's mine and what gets used. But if I have a very special coin and I kind of make it like it's my coin, then it's going to be looking as if I did it for myself. Now, but just because I put it in the kupa doesn't mean it's going to be used to buy animals. Maybe it'll be the leftover stuff. And why is that relevant? Right? Remember, there's things that don't always get used for the animals. They have leftover money. They use it for other things. And there's a law, there is no me'ilah in the leftovers. So maybe my money will end up being used for the leftovers, even if it was very specific money. Rabbi Meir says there is me'ilah in shirayim. So it must be according to his opinion that this Mishnah goes. Otherwise, it might not work because we don't even know that it was necessarily used to buy the animals. It must have been also that it's mesuyam, or you can explain it this way, that it was mesuyam like Rabban Gamliel, and then we knew that that money was used to purchase the animals because we saw that money go out to purchase the animals, and then it would be clear. But now what's the benefit you get from this? You don't really get benefit. You don't mitzvot lavla and don't need to know. We've learned this before. You're getting a mitzvah that you did the machatzit shekel, but it's not a value. Rabbi Avin b'shem Rabbanan d'taman mikevan shehabeit hadim ru'uyim lemashkem v'lo mishkeno k'moshe neheneh. Because I make it that it's mine, the Beit Din's not going to be able to come and take collateral from me. So because of that, I benefit by the fact that it's as if I gave my machatzit shekel and people won't come claiming collateral from me. That's the benefit I get, and that's why I'm chayav in meila. Which again, I'd have to bring a korban, and I'd have to also pay the value plus an extra fifth. Last part for today, mimaser sheni dichtiv ach bechor sheyivukar laHashem bebeima lo yakdish ishotel. Something like a bechor which is sanctified can't be sanctified again. The only thing you could do to make something sanctified is take something that's not sanctified, turn it into sanctified. So how does this work? Koshu kodesh en kedusha chala alav. So anything that's sanctified, you can't make it sanctified from something else. So how does this machatzit shekel work? So what do you do if you accidentally took your maser sheni money or your dishut money and you put it to machatzit shekel? How does it become? Right? The machatzit shekel money has to be hekdesh, otherwise how can you use it to buy the animals? Right? What happens is the money's hekdesh, then you buy the animals and the sanctity moves from the money to the animals. But if there's no sanctity to be moved, then it's a problem. So what do? Maybe sela shechulin. You take non-sacred money, non-sanctified. Ve'omer ma'ot maaser sheni b'kol makom shehen yu mechulin al sela zeh. You basically say after you brought your machatzit shekel, say, listen, whatever sanctity was on that coin is now going to move onto this coin, and then oto sela nitpas l'shem maaser sheni v'ashar na'asin shkalim. Whatever money you put on the sela moves on to the sela, and the right, so the sanctity then moves from the shekel to there, and then the rest, then there's room for the shekel to become sanctified. Okay, we'll end here. As I said earlier, the shiurim for Chag and Shabbat will be up in a few minutes after this one goes up. And I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach, and we'll meet up in a few days.